This module is on reading fluency. Let's think about three related concepts here: reading comprehension, word analysis, and fluency. What is fluency? Well, reading fluency is reading with accuracy, rate, and prosody, without conscious attention, while simultaneously constructing meaning. Fluency is complex. The reader engages in several complex processes simultaneously. These include translates letters into sounds, blends sounds into words, accesses words without thinking, makes meaningful connections within and between sentences, and relates text meaning to prior knowledge. Also makes inferences to supply missing information. Accuracy, rate, and prosody were the three ingredients of fluency. Prosody is the ability to read text orally using appropriate phrasing, intonation, and attention to punctuation. Prosody includes four elements: stress, pitch variation, duration, and chunking into phrases. Let's think about intonation here. Read the following sentences. What is different when pronouncing each sentence? 1. I gave Melissa a present. 2. I will present Melissa with an award. 3. Are you going to give Melissa a present? You can hear the intonation at the end signify there's a question as to whether we're giving her a present or something else. Read the following phrase, I don't think so, in two ways. 1, to reinforce a message, I don't think so, and 2, to show doubt, I don't think so. We can teach intonation using the up and down scale. You can have students turn up the volume of their voice and use variety in their expression. Another way to promote prosody in the accuracy, rate, and prosody equation of fluency is to use the prosody scale by Tyndall and Marston, 1996. There are 5 levels of performance when using the prosody scale. 1, read single words, very choppy, does not flow. 2, some phrasing is noted but still choppy. 3, pauses for end of punctuation, inflection changes may not be present. 4, appropriate flow and phrasing, attention to punctuation with pauses and appropriate inflection most of the time. 5, reading generally flows, voice changes to reflect meaning, appropriate ending inflections. By 8th grade, students should score between 4 and 5 so that reading sounds like talking. Read this passage out loud. What do you notice concerning your prosody with that lexically dense passage? What are the National Reading Panel's findings about fluency instruction? According to the National Reading Panel, reading fluency instruction is most effective when it includes guided, repeated oral reading. Repeated reading allows the learner who has struggled with a new passage to continue reading the same passage again and again until fluency and comprehension increases. We record reading rates on a graph. For example, you might indicate which days are repeated reading days by using a symbol like the yellow star in the graph depicted on this slide. You can set a target oral reading rate and reward the student for reaching or surpassing that target. To build oral reading fluency, we also know that children need massive amounts of practice reading independent level texts. An independent text is one in which the student can read with 95% or greater accuracy and with satisfactory comprehension. Since the National Reading Panel report was published in 2000, we've got research that has occurred and included students with disabilities. So let's look at what we know from recent research on repeated reading with students with disabilities, respective to the National Reading Panel report. Repeated reading has led to gains in reading fluency for students with reading disabilities, especially at the elementary grade level. A combination of repeated reading and a listening passage preview appear to be the most effective method for students with reading disabilities. This is Lee and Yoon 2017 in a meta-analysis published in the Journal of Learning Disabilities. Another point, repeated reading has not been shown to be effective for readers with severe reading impairments at the high school level. This comes from Wexler, Vaughan, Roberts, and Denton's 2010 report in Learning Disabilities Research and Practice. A final point in research here. For students with or at risk for learning disabilities, repeated reading is not supported by rigorous research as defined by the quality indicators used, and therefore is not an evidence-based practice based on those criteria. That's Chard, Ketterlin-Geller, Baker, Duabler, and Apika-Tubatra, 2009, Exceptional Children. So you might be detecting contradiction or confusion over the 3 points bulleted here. Let's try to make sense of research. From the data that we have, we can conclude 2 points. One, a combination of methods promote reading fluency for elementary age readers with learning disabilities and reading goals on their IEPs. The second point is that repeated reading by itself is not sufficient to promote reading fluency for high school age readers with disabilities that have adverse effects on reading, including learning disabilities, intellectual disability, and autism. So we need more high-quality studies to know what works, and we can use wide independent reading plus repeated reading plus other strategies to promote reading fluency for students with disabilities. Let's think about what some of those strategies might be and what some practices might look like for promoting reading fluency for all readers. One strategy is class-wide peer tutoring. We've got pairs of students who take turns reading to each other. This increases the amount of time that students spend reading in class. It also affords an opportunity to use repeated reading and 1 or 2 minute timings and gives extra practice with the difficult parts of a passage. Scalloping the text is another strategy where you can use available reading material and draw scallops to connect phrases logically. You read the text until the sound, speed, and rhythm are acceptable. Partner reading is a strategy where you pair the top half of the class with the bottom half of the class based on baseline scores. Select reading material that lower performing students can read with at least 95% accuracy and designate the more advanced reader as the first read partner. Give both students the opportunity to read and be tutors. This requires careful teacher preparation and organization. There are 3 fluency drill procedures in your interactive learning guide. You can find a script for implementing these. The 3 are error drill, listening passage preview, and then sort of nested together is the word repeat and or sentence repeat fluency drill. To review, in order to promote reading fluency, there are items on the left of the slide saying what we should do, and items on the right hand of the slide telling us what not to do. So here's our to do. Do this to promote reading fluency. 1, class-wide peer tutoring. 2, scallop the text. 3, partner reading. 4, teach intonation. 5, repeated reading with listening passage preview or error drill correction or word repeat or sentence repeat. Echo reading, choral reading, and reader's theater. Do not do these 2 things if your goal is for students to make meaning from text and if your goal is for students to build reading fluency. These 2 things do not work and, in fact, have adverse effects. Popcorn reading and round-robin reading. Assessing oral reading fluency, it all comes down to data. We've got different mechanisms for collecting data on oral reading fluency. One is to use reading curriculum-based measures where we time students' oral reading rates on assigned texts several days per week and chart their performance over time. An example of how to do this might be to identify segments of 100 words and then graph the amount of time taken to read that segment. Alternatively, you might choose a passage and time the student for 1 or 2 minutes and determine the reading rate. So number of words read correct over number of words read correct plus incorrect. Curriculum-based measures help you track students' progress over time. There are published mechanisms for you to administer a CBM for oral reading. We've got the DIBELS, AIMSweb, and then Easy RCBM, so Easy CBM website that University of Oregon houses. In addition to calculating a rate, you might consider using a fluency rubric or rating scale, where you can rate expression and volume, phrasing, smoothness, and pace across 4 different performance level indicators. If you're doing some oral reading fluency assessments, the method of using a running record from Marie Clay's work is helpful to guide your practice here. You can choose text that the student would authentically read, and you can score reading performance to look at patterns of errors or miscues and understand how the reader is using strategies to make meaning from print. Along with that running record, you could add a retell, and there are different ways of scoring retelling. Some people just count the number of words retold. Some people generate rubrics or use existing rubrics to rate the retelling, maybe number of events. Did they retell all of the narrative elements, character setting, problem solution? There are 2 video links here that I'll link on Canvas so that you can watch some running record with retell in action. When thinking about scoring oral reading behavior, it's important to be sensitive to and pay attention to dialectal differences and language differences. So there's a large body of research that shows a connection and emphasizes the importance of oral language in the acquisition and development of literacy skills. When a child lives in a world of 2 languages or lives at home where a dialect other than the so-called standard American English or mainstream American English is used, there might be a mismatch between oral and written representations. We could see the manifestation of this at the morphological, phonological, or syntactic levels. Reading assessment then might be influenced in any of these areas. Scoring guidelines from standard protocols for measures of reading fluency, like the Gray Oral Reading Test or the DRA, give some guidance on scoring when there's a dialectal or language difference. So, for example, regional pronunciations, provided the pronunciations are correct and are not marked as a deviation. A word that's mispronounced due to a speech problem or a dialect may be coded but not counted as an error. Give no error for pronunciation or dialect. And then from the Ames Web developers, Haas, Pasp, and Howell, we've got variations in pronunciation explainable by logical language norms or speech sound production are correct. Additional scoring guidelines here from the Dibble. Student is not penalized for imperfect pronunciation due to dialect. That right there is a little bit jarring, isn't it? Imperfect due to dialect. That kind of makes it seem like dialect is not perfect, when if we value all languages, they all would be equally valuable, valued, perfect. Mispronunciation of the ed ending is counted only once as an error. Different dialects omit the ed ending as an inflectional marker, and it's a meaningful use of language in different dialects, and here they're giving a 1 penalty for that and not a repeated. So it's a little bit more of a conservative and possibly deficit-based stance in this scoring guide. The BRI, so Jerry John's Basic Reading Inventory, says teachers should remember, however, that some speakers of a particular dialect may omit word endings. Miscues of this type, as long as they make sense in the reader's dialect, should not be regarded as significant. And what that means there is it wouldn't be a focus of intervention or remediation. So some dialectal differences might be viewed by some administrators of oral reading tests as incorrect. That's in quotes there to point out the fact that viewing someone's language as wrong when that person's language is a valid form of communication, system of communication, governed by rules in a dialect or language used in the child's home, that idea of it being wrong or incorrect stands to question. With regard to reading the way that a teacher approaches those differences, viewing it as correct, incorrect, versus a valuable, valid system of communication will impact the reading outcome. In fact, lack of sensitivity to those differences will promote Deficit views will increase referrals to a speech pathologist or special education when they are not warranted. So it's important to practice lack of sensitivity and increase your understanding of what dialectal differences look like, sound like, and function like. There's a resource that the PBS broadcast put out called "Do You Speak American?" This sounds troubling. It's intended to problematize linguicism with that title, "Do You Speak American?" But you can find video clips and additional explanations for various dialects throughout the U.S. on the URL that you see here on the screen. I think I've got it linked so that it directly goes to African American English, African American language, African American vernacular English, but you can find additional dialects used in the U.S. on this website. Let's think about fluency and emerging bilingual students. The idea of miscue is a term that's used in thinking about running records, scoring oral reading. The idea is that a student has miscued or misunderstood the printed representation of language. Not necessarily an error, it has different meanings, but it's functioning as a way of coding oral reading behavior. There are some patterns of reading in languages other than English that seem more common in the other languages than what we observe in English. So for example, we might in English place adjectives before nouns. So I might say I want black coffee, right? The adjective black is describing how I take my coffee. In other languages, including Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, Navajo, adjectives follow the noun. So a student whose home language is Spanish, for example, might read aloud in English using Spanish syntax just because that's a natural thing that emerging bilingual, emerging biliterate students do. Please order coffee black for me. They understand the meaning, they've got their native syntax, and it's just coming out with what would seem like a reversion of the words black, coffee, coffee black. When coding for oral reading, a native English speaker who's not familiar with these syntactic structures might mark this as a transposition and count the words coffee and black as distinct miscues. However, for an emerging bilingual student or an English language learner or ELL, an evaluator could mark the transposition to just indicate that it happened, but use a symbol, however they want to represent the symbol, to note that miscue was due to a second language, a second dialect, being in the process of learning. I sometimes do that when I'm tired. I just revert, and in Polish we don't use articles, so I might just omit them. Oral reading behavior and English language learners or emerging bilingual students. Emerging bilingual readers often use context clues to make sense of ideas in text. Cognate recognition can aid in the meaning-making process. So cognates are words that look alike and sound alike across languages. False cognates, however, can inhibit text comprehension. An emerging bilingual student whose home language is Spanish may read the words in the sentence, "I assist at school" accurately, yet they might interpret this to mean I attend at school because of the word asistir, translating to attend. English language learners and oral reading behavior continues here. An emerging bilingual student might interpret visual information and translate that information into sound in a way that differs from what a monolingual native English speaker would do. These differences in pronunciation may signify that an emerging bilingual student has the ability to recognize phonemes, but has difficulty producing them. Think of, for example, the word sprinkle. That exact cluster with the letters NKL seldom, if ever, occurs in a Spanish word. Therefore, it could be difficult to pronunciate the written form of that word sprinkle into spoken English because it's not a recognizable common consonant cluster in Spanish.